So today we're going to talk about the perfect storm. So if you've ever watched the movie from 2000 with George Clooney, it's a classic. If you haven't seen it, you ought to check it out. But the perfect storm is where, in this case with George Clooney, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And so the odds that were generally for him went totally against him. We're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk with an expert, John McIntyre. And John is a professional engineer in Texas with over 46 years of diverse professional experience in structural, electrical, mechanical, and aquatic engineering design. The aquatic one's the important for us. He holds a BS in architectural engineering and a BS in physics from the University of Texas in Austin. He's the VP of McIntyre & McIntyre Incorporated, which is an architectural engineering and aquatic consulting firm in Austin, Texas. He's active in PHTA, that's the Pool Hot Tub Alliance, both in Central Texas chapter and with the PHTA National, where he serves on the ASR Task Force Committee Chair. He's an advanced certified building professional in PHTA. I think he's actually a master's now, though. We'll ask him about that. A Genesis instructor, a Hague certified roofing inspector, and serves as an expert witness and forensic consultant in construction litigation. John is also past commissioner in the City of Austin Building and Standards Commission from 2015 to 2019. So let's welcome John.
Welcome to the Luxury Outdoor Living Podcast with Mike
and Trey
Farley of Farley Pool Designs. For over 40 years, we've helped homeowners turn their backyards into personal retreats and unforgettable memories. Let's build your paradise. Well, good afternoon. This is Mike Farley from Farley Pool Designs. And again, we're hosting another episode of Luxury Outdoor Living Podcast. So we have a special guest today. And as I said in my intro, a little bit about John and his bio and the situation that we're going to talk about ASR. But before we get into it, why don't you introduce yourself, John, and tell us something interesting that wasn't on your bio?
Well, I am an engineer in Austin, Texas, which is kind of the Texas central hotspot for ASR problems right now. I grew up most of junior high and high school time in Bryan College Station, where my dad was a professor at A&M for, 27, 28 years, something like that. But then, of course, being a good, obedient son, I defected and went to Austin and attended UT. So I got my degree from here in architectural engineering, and that's pretty much where I've remained ever since.
Okay. Yeah, I understand how that goes. I went to Texas Tech, and my wife's father taught at OU. So what did our son do when it came time to pick who he was rooting for? He met Colt McCoy and decided he was a UT fan. So he would show up at every family gathering as a young child with his orange Longhorn jersey. So anyway, it was...
Well, when Dad and I used to watch the Texas and Texas A&M games on Thanksgiving before they split conferences, but are now back together, we used to, of course, I'd root for Texas and he would root for A&M. And I said, there was always hope back then. A&M wasn't doing quite as well as they have done in more recent years. And I said, there was always hope for Dad because he would root for A&M, but he wouldn't put money on them.
Yeah, it was, they are doing better these days though. So
they are.
So ASR, I've gone to I'm an education nerd. Okay. So Genesis, I was in the second class Genesis ever did. I have every one of their certifications. I've been in every one of their construction classes. Watershape University, I've done the same thing because I'm a believer and you can learn stuff from everybody. So I'm always looking for things, and I never saw anything about ASR over 5 years ago.
I don't remember it ever being taught in a class or being explained or anything like that. So do you have any idea when?
Where it all started?
Well, yeah. So I know that ASR now has been around, and there's isolated cases of this that show up all over the United States. But we've got a real hotbed, as you said. You're in the middle of it down there in Austin. So, can you explain first of all, I guess, what is ASR?
Well, ASR is a reaction between reactive aggregate that generally has a lot of silicon oxides in it and the hydroxides in cement in the presence of moisture that forms an expansive gel inside the concrete matrix. So it expands much like freezing water inside of a water pipe. It expands and it cracks the concrete from the inside out. The telltale signs you very often see are what they call spider web or alligator cracking on the inside surface of the pool, which is just the random cracking. It's looks like alligator skin. It doesn't have any linearity to it. It's not like a shrinkage crack that tends to be more linear. It's just random cracking all over the surface. And that all started with the passage of the EPA passed the Clean Power Act back in 2016, I believe it was.
Okay.
And so by about 2017, that caused all the coal-fired power plants, or a good portion of them, to switch over from coal to natural gas. Fly ash, which is one of the main constituents that you add to the concrete mix to prevent fly ash, among other things, it makes it more waterproof and it makes it also stronger, the concrete. But the fly ash, it counteracts, it's a pozzolan, and it counteracts ASR formation. This was typically added into concrete mixes prior to 2016-17.
It was almost like a filler, right? I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people didn't think it was a big deal. They just put that fly ash in the mix.
It was a waste product. They basically gave it away. So it has benefits for concrete. So the suppliers put it in the mix.
Yeah.
And you never heard about ASR because there was fly ash in almost all the concrete. So fast forward to 2017 now, the plants have shut down. The fly ash disappears from the market, and some of the distributors now are not putting fly ash in their mixture anymore because now you've got to go buy it for about the equivalent of cost of cement or a little more, rather than having it basically being given away for free to add in. So they figured, and it had been so long, people forgot some of the reasons why you put fly ash in concrete. One of them being counteracting ASR. Because nobody had heard of it, because they'd been doing it so long, nobody was aware that they'd forgotten that was the cure for ASR. ASR was discovered back in the 1930s, so it's been known about for a long time. It's just it hadn't been a problem, so people kind of forgot about it. And they thought, oh, we'll just go back to straight Portland cement without the fly ash in it. And they forgot some of the consequences of that.
So one thing I heard also is back in your area, there was a huge government contract with the highways, which they specified that fly ash be used. And because there was reduced amounts, that's where it all got shuttled over to as well. Is that kind of part of the story?
The reduced amount of fly ash that was available, a lot of it got consumed in there. Now, that being said, China is still burning coal like crazy, and you can get it from over there.
Right.
There was only a couple of places in Texas that actually you want the class F fly ash, I believe it is the one that you want to use for ASR prevention. That is what pretty much disappeared from the market. There was one plant, it's east of Waco or Tyler, somewhere up in there, that is the main one in Texas that provides it. But they ran in short supply, and most of theirs was going to the highway department. So most distributors couldn't, they just didn't get it, and they had to then order it from China, and there were shipping delays and, things like that too. the consequence is it got cut out of a lot of the mixtures. So all of a sudden, pool contractors who've been ordering from these same suppliers for years, thinking they were getting the same mixture, all of a sudden now we're getting a different mixture. But it takes around here, kind of the sweet spot time for ASR to develop is around 2 to 4 years. There are some that come earlier, some that come later, but the majority of the ones that I've seen are somewhere between 2 and 4 years is when you start seeing that spider web cracking on the surface and the obvious effects of it. So you go to 2017, 2018, by the time the fly ash had run out of the supplies, you go forward a couple of years, and it was about 2019, 2020, this crack started showing up in the pools because there was no fly ash in the mixtures. The quick aside is that gunite is less susceptible to fly ash, not 0%, but it's less susceptible to fly ash than shotcrete. Shotcrete, because it has larger aggregate and a bigger surface area for the reaction to take place, is more susceptible to it.
Right.
So anyway, back to 2020, the cracks start showing up. Everybody knows pools can get cracks for a variety of reasons. I mean, before ASR became a problem, there were cracks in pools and crack repair was routinely performed. So the contractor would go out, repair the pool. A month or two later, he'd get a call back. Hey, there's another crack or two. They'd go repair that. Another couple months, there's more cracks. It got to the point where they couldn't keep up with it. Then they started doing some floor tests, sent it to the labs, found out that it was in fact ASR. It wasn't just random cracking from shrinkage or deflection or, any of the normal quote unquote reasons that a pool might crack. So it wasn't until late 20, early 21 that people really started discovering that ASR was the issue that was causing all these cracks. Then you go 21 to 25 currently, at least around Central Texas here, it has now become the hot topic among pool contractors. And unfortunately, everybody now is scared to death that any crack in their pool is an ASR issue, since there is not a cure for ASR, although we'll talk about in a minute, don't let me forget, there are a few things you can do to extend the life of the pool, but they're not cures. But everybody is scared to death that you're going to have to rip the pool out. Well, a pool that cost, $150,000, 5 years ago, now probably costs $250,000. Plus, you've got to add on 50 grand, 60 grand for demo and haul off, not to mention the damage you do to your yard, your fencing, your irrigation system, whatever else. And depending how much deck around the pool that you've got to tear out with it is collateral damage. So, you can be looking anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 very easily to have a pool taken out and removed, depending on the size and the collateral damage. So it's not a cheap thing to do. People are worried, and rightfully they've got concerns about it, and it has become the hot topic issue in Central Texas.
So the ironic thing is shotcrete is done over gunite using the larger aggregate over sand because it's generally believed to be a stronger product, right?
Well, there's several reasons, and we should differentiate. Part of the confusion is from the nomenclature, because technically both gunite and shotcrete are both shotcrete. Gunite is dry process shotcrete, where the material, the cement and all, is shoved down the pipes dry.
Right.
Water and air is added at the nozzle, and it's sprayed out. So the nozzleman controls the mixture. He has a lot of control over the mixture, which can be good or bad depending on how good your nozzleman is.
100%.
The shotcrete, which is technically wet process shotcrete, comes from a typical concrete mixing truck with the big drum that you see all the time. Those are very carefully weighed. The components are weighed. The water moisture contents are monitored, and they are all mixed at the plant. So you get a very uniform mixture from truck to truck to truck. So if you're doing larger jobs like commercial swimming pools, shotcrete, wet shotcrete is generally preferred because it's a more consistent delivery from truck to truck. It also has larger stones in it. So you get a little less shrinkage. The main part, stone is obviously an inert product. It's a chunk of rock. It doesn't shrink or swell during the curing process. It's the concrete and the pore spaces that shrink and swell as a result of the hydration process. So in gunite, you've got sand and cement. It has a smaller surface area. The typical sand grain is about a millimeter, maybe a little bit more, whereas on aggregate, you've got a 3/8 rock. That has somewhere between 100 and 150 times more surface area. So what happens is on the gunite, and again, it's not a 0%, but you hardly ever get ASR in gunite. I will reiterate, though, there are exceptions to that. They're few, but they are there. So it depends on the aggregate reactivity. There's about 4 different classes of reactivity for aggregates. And around here in Central Texas, one of the main reactive aggregates is the chert rock. It has a lot of silicon dioxide in it. And that's what reacts with the hydroxides in the cement. But the chert rock can go from a 0 rating to a 3 rating. There's 4 categories. 0 being non-reactive, which means you're never going to get ASR. A 3 rating, yeah, you may want to go find another supplier because you're likely to have some problems. In between, you can work with it. But even at that, there's a whole selection matrix that I believe it was Texas A&M came up with this, of a selection of what kind of products you're building, the likelihood, of damage, what you can tolerate, things like that, as to how much fly ash you should add into those mixtures to keep them within acceptable limitations. And typically for pools and around here in Central Texas, you're looking at somewhere in a 20 to 25% of the cement, not the total mix, of the cement content of the mixture that you replace with fly ash to counteract ASR. With gunite, it goes down because the reaction, it takes less to counteract the reaction. You only need somewhere in the neighborhood of 10%. That being said, very few of the gunite companies have the capability to add fly ash into their mix because it requires a separate bin to mix it before you put it in the trucks to, pump it out. So the biggest caution is putting fly ash in the mix. If you do it, you're probably not going to have problems. If you don't, around here at least, you're very likely to. Now, it's not just limited to Texas, like you mentioned earlier. Up along the East Coast, you get in the Washington, D.C., Virginia area. They've got some cases there. You get up in Northeast, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, up in there, they've got cases. You get over on the West Coast, anywhere from Seattle on down to San Diego. There's cases there. Not as many as Central Texas, but they're there. If you live, I think it's in Montana or North Dakota, you're probably not going to have a problem. I suspect that's because nobody builds swimming pools there because it's too cold.
Could be.
But it's not just in Austin, but Austin has so many more cases than anywhere else. It's the hot spot. And the reason is that most of the aggregate here is sourced along the Colorado River between Austin and Bastrop, which is the next town downstream. And, the floods have washed the same aggregates down the river, deposited them all these areas that are now quarries. And so you're getting pretty much the same material. So, but it can vary. Even within areas of a quarry, it can go from less to more reactive, and at different depths, it can go from less to more reactive and vice versa. The biggest caution on that, and I may be jumping a little ahead here, but is to test your aggregate. And there's several tests that are available for that, but you've got to be careful on some of these tests because some of them have a fairly high percentage of false reporting.
I was going to bring that. That's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. The typical one that's probably most often referenced is ASTM C1260. And that's where it's a mortar bar test. And they make a a bar of concrete. I think it's 3 or 4 inches square and 16 inches long and maybe 18 inches. And they cast that, let it cure. Then they put it in a brine solution at elevated temperatures, somewhere around 100 to 110 degrees. And there's a 16-day test that if that sample expands more than 0.04%, the aggregate is considered reactive and that you're likely to get some ASR issues out of that. The problem with that test is that there's over a 50% false reporting rate on that. Now, some of those...
Not great odds.
Yeah, no, they're not. It's better than nothing, but it's not definitive. Because some of those reportings will say that good material is bad. It's material that really could be used. But other false reports are saying bad material is good, which is the one that really will hurt you more. There is a 2-year version of that test, which is much more accurate. However, who has 2 years to wait? If I come to you and say, hey, I want you to build me a pool, you say, well, it's going to be 2 years so I can test the material before I can start. I'm going to go find somebody else who can build me a pool this summer.
Yeah, well, we can get that boat from China by then, right? So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. So there are some tests out there that you can do. Now, this is the kind of the preliminary, but I would say to the pool builders, make sure your aggregate's tested. If you look in the specifications, ASTM C33, which is the aggregate specifications. There's one for coarse aggregate and there's one for fine aggregate, but they both say exactly the same thing except for coarse and fine. And it says that the aggregate shall contain no materials that deleteriously react with the cement to cause bad deleterious expansion, I guess it is. And that puts the onus on the suppliers to test this stuff and make sure that the aggregate at least appears to conform, whether you're doing it. The 2-year test, typically what we've heard around here is the quarries will do tests monthly or some of them even bi-weekly. And then they will keep a running tab on an annual basis, to get the longer tests on there. So you can look at the monthly, and that kind of gives you what they're being quarrying right now versus what has historically been taken out of that pit and how the two of them compare.
So go ahead. So a homeowner, the question they need to ask their contractor is, A, are you using fly ash in your gunite or shotcrete? Okay.
Absolutely.
B, if you're not, are you getting your aggregate certified? Because when this all happened before, I mean, who's responsible for all this? I mean, I guess that's a whole different side note, going down.
That's the basis of a lot of lawsuits in Austin right now.
I mean, because there wasn't a single contractor out there that knew to ask those questions, I think 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of good contractors that have been put out of business because of this. Yeah. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I know.
When you go to the suppliers, they say, well, we didn't know what it was going to be used for. We didn't know if it was going to be water immersed or, if you take like a house foundation and now you can get ASR in a house foundation, but you don't hear about it very often. Number one is because you've typically got polyethylene under the slab as a vapor barrier. And then up above, you got air conditioning. So you've got a climate controlled humidity. Right. So there's not enough moisture you need about 70 to 80% relative humidity to promote the ASR reaction. So in a house, very often, unless you got a very high water table or something, and the only 2 instances of foundation ASR I've seen have been at lake houses where the water table is very, very high. So it can happen, but not very often. But in a pool, you've got the outside pool that in the wintertime, it rains and it's low evaporation and cool. It stays moist. And of course, on the inside, you're filled 24/7 with a readily available supply of water that's going to seep through any crack. And plaster, although it is the main waterproofing membrane in a pool, is not 100% waterproof.
No.
It doesn't, unless there's cracks in it, it doesn't allow wet water through, but it allows water vapor. And as I said, you don't need wet water to form ASR. You just need about 70 to 80% relative humidity, and it'll start forming.
Okay. So those are two questions the homeowner could ask. Is there anything else they could ask to make sure that they get a product that wouldn't be so the fly ash and the certifications? Anything else you can think of?
Well, the ones I would ask is, number one, if it is shotcrete. Well, first you want to ask if it's shotcrete or gunite and make sure they understand the difference.
Yes.
If it's gunite, your chances of ASR are much, 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 much lower of ever occurring. Not zero, but very low.
I heard personally that there's only less than 10 cases that have showed up in Austin with gunite. So, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know the
true.
exact number, but it's
a very small number. I heard one installers had no cases whatsoever, but a very small number.
I know I've talked to one of the bigger pool builders here that's a national pool builder, and he said that they have had no cases in their gunite pools. All of their problems have been in the shotcrete pools.
Okay. So, we established that first. Is it gunite or is it shotcrete? Okay. Very good.
So if you got shotcrete, is there fly ash in it?
Okay.
They need some sort of a report from the material company. Usually if you got ready mix, you can get a ticket with it, and it lists all the components on there. So you should ask two cases. We'll start with if you're building a brand new pool,
yes.
Then we'll address if you're going to go buy a house with an existing pool.
Perfect.
So building a pool, you want to make sure you get the mix tickets from the builder, that he collects them and has them to you, and you can look at them, because it's going to list all the components that are in that mixture. And if fly ash is in there, it's going to show up. If it's not, it's going to be void. If you see a mixed ticket and there needs to be some homeowner education as well, because there's a lot of guys out here that don't understand all the nuances of this. So if it doesn't have fly ash in it, you want to reject that mixture before it ever gets shot. That's in a perfect world. Most people aren't going to be that. Most homeowners aren't that knowledgeable about it.
You would hope your pool builder would be, though, that he would be checking those. You would be
amazed that even in Central Texas, just in the last 2 weeks, I have run across someone who did not know what ASR was.
Whoa.
How you can do that and be in the business in the center hotspot of the worst, plague in the country, I don't know. But it's been on the front page of the American Statesman, on the Sunday edition twice. It's been on the K-View on your side, one of the consumer protection shows they've got.
I read
times, like 4 or 5 times. It's been pretty well broadcast. And the pool community, once people have pools, they start to talk with each other.
Well, sure.
And you get a lot of conversation there. But anyway, so you want to check, gunite or shotcrete, does it have fly ash or not? Has the aggregate been tested? And we talked about the testing. Now, the one thing you want to be careful with, I know some of these guys are going out and getting the aggregate tested at one of the local testing labs. And if it meets the ASTM 1260, it would be less than 0.4% expansion. They say we have an engineered mixture and you will not get ASR. That's not what the test says. The test says it has limited expansion, which means you are less likely to have ASR. It is not a guarantee. So if somebody says, I've had an engineered mix and you will not get ASR, absolutely will not get it, that is incorrect. Okay. It means they have gone a step further than just taking it verbatim and using it. So that's good, but it doesn't mean that you're completely free of ASR liability.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So those are great questions for them to understand. Okay.
So then we're going to move on from there.
Going to buy a house.
Something else. if you're going to go buy a house.
Okay.
Because we are getting
Pool.
a lot of questions from realtors who are coming up and saying,
Sure.
you go to a house that's got a pool. People used to go, oh boy, we got a pool. Now they're going, oh boy, we got a pool.
What year was this pool built?
Yeah.
So
That's the first thing you want to ask is, when was it built? If it's over 5 years old, you are on the rapidly declining side of the probability curve that you're going to ever have ASR. If it hasn't developed, at least in Central Texas, in other parts of the country where they use different aggregates, it can be up to 10 years. But around the Austin area, as I mentioned, the kind of the sweet spot's about 2 to 4 years. But once you get out to 5 years, you're dropping off very quickly as to the probability that you're going to have ASR. So it's over 5 years old, you're probably okay. I get calls from people, well, the pool's a year and a half old. You know, my first question is that, well, if you've got cracks, it's most likely something else, maybe a shrinkage crack or something else, but that's awfully early for ASR. That being said, I looked at one pool that was a year and 9 months old, had one of the worst cracking patterns I have seen in any pool, new or older. So it can happen. That means that particular pool had very, very reactive aggregate in it. But you want to ask the age of the pool. You want to ask, is it gunite or shotcrete, and make sure you know the difference between those. Because and I wish we could come up with better names to fully differentiate these rather than wet mix and dry mix. Because when you say shotcrete, there's somewhat of an ambiguity between the two terms.
Right.
And a lot of people use it. I mean, it's like when you say, do you want a Coke? Well, do you want a brand name Coca-Cola, or do you want a cola soda, like Pepsi or something else? You know, that's part of the problem. And some of the people, when they say gunite, you're getting shotcrete. As a matter of fact, I know one of the local companies around here, they pretty much exclusively provide shotcrete, wet process shotcrete. And I know a number of pool builders have specified gunite in their pool contract. And the truck rolls up and they think they are getting gunite, which is actually a trade name for the early version of dry process shotcrete.
Right.
And what gets applied is wet process shotcrete. And it's because the builders don't know. There's no licensing requirement in Texas, so some of these guys really don't know the difference. So you got to beware. And the other thing you want to ask is, has your pool contractor had any history of problems with ASR? Who is their material supplier? There's about 4 or 5 of them around here. If it's one of those, you are very likely going to have an ASR problem. Did they get, if it's shotcrete, did they get the mix tickets? You know, do you have copies of those? Is there any sign of cracking in the pool? The spider web cracking, the random directional cracking, those sort of things you want to look for.
So can you core sample a pool and test it and find out if it's got ASR?
You can, absolutely. Okay. It's called a petrographic test, and you go take a 3-inch core, you drill it in. What I usually do is get about 3 or 4 samples, and I'll test at least 2 of them and hold 2 of them reserved just in case we need them. Take it to, here in Austin, WJE is the only firm in town that does petrographic testing for this. I think the next nearest lab that does it is in Colorado. There may be one in between here in Colorado. I mean, there's not very many of them in the country that do this. So we're lucky to have one right here. However, then when you take it there, they will look at it under electron microscope, and they will determine if the little pockets of ASR are there, that you can see that, how much is there, how much it's progressed, if there's micro cracking where the expanding gel has cracked the concrete inside, and this usually starts interior to the concrete and then works its way to the surface to get that spider web cracking, because it has to crack the shell and then translate through the plaster to get the cracking. I have heard of a few rare instances where you can actually get some of it in the plaster, but not that often. I mean, those have been extremely rare cases. So when we do in-ground pools, the 2 areas we see the reaction starting is somewhat inboard of the exterior face, where the wet soil in the winter provides moisture, and on the pool face, where the pool, of course, has 24/7 inundation, especially if there's a crack in the plaster. Then that provides a water path for the water to get interior, mix with the concrete matrix, and form the ASR. So cracking is the main thing you look for visually, but the petrographic test basically gives you an X-ray picture of the interior of the concrete. And that interior microcracking will start first and then progress out to the surface where you actually see it. So by the time you see it on the surface of the plaster, it's been going on for a while inside the shell. So this is where a petrographic test can be beneficial. And it's kind of the gold standard for seeing if you've got ASR or not. The problem is it's not cheap. By the time you get someone out there to core it, you're probably spending $1,500 or more. The test is usually anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000, depending if you get one or two cores tested. So you wind up at paying, and by the time you get a couple other people involved, you're going to spend $8,000 to $10,000 on a petrographic test.
It's probably not fast either.
Yeah, no, they're getting better. Now you can get them back in 3 to 4 weeks, but during the height of this, a couple of summers ago, it was taking 8 months to get the results back because the lab was so backed up. They were having, 4 or 5 different samples brought in every day.
If I've got a structure that isn't built as well, the moisture is going to get to the aggregates faster, and therefore the ASR probably is going to show up faster than a pool that's really well built. But if it's well built, even you're saying like 5 years, then the chances are it's not going to show up in the shell. But the ones that are poorly built, it probably shows up quicker because they're more susceptible to cracks. Their steel ratio's not as good. The shotcrete's not as dense. Their waterproofing's probably not as good. So those are all things that would help reduce the water.
And the reactivity, the relative reactivity of the aggregate being the most important thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but yeah, I mean, even well-built pools, if all the conditions are there for ASR formation, will in a fair likelihood develop ASR at some point. Will it take longer? Yes, absolutely. What some of the guys have been doing is mixing things in the waterproofing like Zypex, mixing it integrally with the mixture so that the entire cross-section is waterproofed. As I mentioned, the 3 things, the reactive, the high alkaline cement, the reactive aggregate, and water are the 3. That's the magic triangle to make ASR form gel formation. If you cut out any one of them, you stop the reaction. Well, you need the rocks and the cement, obviously. You can't take them out of the mix. So what you go after is the waters, limit the water to get in. If you could waterproof a pool perfectly, then yes, you could eliminate ASR. That's very hard to do, though. Even with good waterproofing agents, there's a certain amount of porosity in a pool. Yes. Will it take longer to develop then? Yes, absolutely. But will it eventually develop? There's a good likelihood.
Okay, so we're going to buy a house. We've checked out the history. We know that we're past 5 years. Okay, we're not past 5 years. We could core sample a pool to find out, but it's going to take a long time, probably more than my closing time on the house to know, if that's possible or not. So, is there things that you can do to an existing shell to limit the likelihood of it or slow down this process?
Well, if you can apply a waterproofing agent, which that would protect the inside shell. Several of the major manufacturers, Mirror Coat, any one of 4 or 5 other manufacturers make coatings that you can put on, waterproof coatings.
Correct.
That will slow it down from the inside. But if it's an in-ground pool, it's still getting wet from the outside. How do you stop that? Well, you really can't. You can't dig up the pool and waterproof the outside. You can put things, and I know Miracoat, Laticrete, there's half a dozen of them make this. There's a 3-part coating where you put a waterproofing layer on, then you put a flexible membrane that is kind of a rubbery type of coating that's usually you put on a 30 mil layer, embed a fiber mesh reinforcing it, put on another 30 mil layer, and then put a bond coat over that so that the plaster will stick. That will work over a certain amount of cracking. There are some pools around here that with ASR that has been applied to, and 5 years later, they're still working and they have not recracked. There's others that have been done that way, and within less than a year, they have recracked. So it depends on the severity of the ASR and how much reaction is occurring. Another thing you can do is put something like a vinyl liner in the pool. This does not cure ASR, but it will extend the useful lifetime of the pool. If you're going to do something like that, you want to get the thick vinyl, not the thin vinyl, because those cracks, as things move, temperature and all that, and below ground movement, expansion, contraction around here, we have a lot of expansive clay that'll move the pool ever so slightly, but it will. And it can abrade the liner if you don't get the thicker liner. That will extend your lifetime. It's cheaper than taking the pool out and replacing it, but it's not a cure. I mean, eventually at some point, you're going to get to where the concrete has deteriorated quite a bit and the liner just, won't hold up anymore. But maybe you get 10, 15 years of additional use out of it. And that is worth it to a lot of people. A lot of people can't afford $250,000 to $500,000. And right now, the insurance companies, a lot of them are balking at paying on this. They're trying to use the silica exclusion to get out of payment, which is not what the silica exclusion was intended to be. It was after the World Trade Centers got their planes flown into them and collapsed, and all the concrete dust, and of course concrete has silica in it, in the sand, got in all the air conditioning units up in the air in New York City, and people started filing suit to get their air conditioning systems cleaned out. And the insurance company's going, we can't clean the whole city. We don't have the funds for that. So they started putting these silica exclusions into the insurance policies. They were so, whether on purpose or just not well written, they are trying to apply that to pools where the silica is all encased, encapsulated in solid concrete. It's not a pollutant. It's something that's contained in the material that you're using. There has been, I understand, in all the cases going around here, one of the district, I think a federal judge or a district judge, has shot that down as a reason for the insurance companies to deny coverage. So that may make some of them more prone to want to settle. I have started to see some cases that are settling, but it is a slow, arduous process. There's a multi-district litigation going on in Austin where all these cases against one supplier have been consolidated into one defense case. So you try the defense one time and apply it to all the cases rather than doing it 300 times. That is still in court. It has not been decided. There have been some interim rulings on it, but it is still progressing, and it could be another year or two before it's settled. These people have already been going through this several years. So you're looking at, 3-4 years without the use of a pool, unless you do something like a vinyl liner or some sort of a coating. Otherwise, if you try and use it, the pool leaks and your water bills go way up. You start leaking into the ground. If you've got expansive soil and you put a lot of water into it, you're going to cause shifting, maybe break pipes. There's a lot of downsides to just leaving it as it is.
Wow.
Some people are just taking and filling it in and making a planter out of it.
Yeah, it's a sad story because people invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into creating paradise, and now they've got, a train wreck in their backyard.
Yeah. And they have done nothing wrong.
They've done nothing wrong. The builder did nothing wrong, in most cases. But if you got builders running around today that don't know what ASR is in your particular area, then that's not good. But
and this is where it's so important to have the groups like Genesis and PHTA and that are promoting education on this stuff and getting it out. Matter of fact, I should mention PHTA. If you go to their website, phta.org, and I happen to be the chairman of the ASR committee, there are a couple of publications on there that you don't have to be a member, that you can get on there, and it's a listing of the different tests that you can apply, what to look for, what the time spans, a lot of the things we've been talking about. And there's one that is geared towards consumers, which would be more like somebody going out getting ready to build a pool or to buy a house with a pool. The other one is a little more technically oriented towards builders. And it has a more thorough description of the various tests you can perform beforehand to make sure that you're not going to have the problem, and what components you should add and how to determine that.
Okay.
But that one you've got to be a member to get to.
Gotcha. There's classes, I'm sure, the last couple of times, either at the international show or the Southwest show, there's been classes on that as well, to help people with, additional education and be familiar with it. And to me, it's something, even if it's not in your area, that you need to be aware of, because a lot of times consumers get confused about details about things. And so it's helpful to help them understand what it is and what it isn't. So I've got a home now, and I've got a pool that's got ASR, and that's been determined. So does someone reach out to an engineer? I mean, or who do they go to try to figure out the next steps that they can go through in the process?
You can go to an engineer, but you need to make sure it's an engineer who's familiar with pool construction.
Okay.
I know some excellent engineers who can build you a 5-story building in their sleep that you will never have a problem with. Same engineers cannot build you a good pool.
Sure.
It's a different niche in the market.
100%.
One of the things you can do is go to phta.org, and they will connect you with people in the area who are PHTA members. Hopefully, as good members, they have you're required to take continuing education, and they have kept up with this subject. I know in the Central Texas chapter, every time we have a meeting, which used to be monthly, but after COVID, it's kind of gone back to quarterly. And then in the interim, we put out newsletters on the alternate months. Every one of those, I put out a piece on some form of pool construction, code requirements. A lot of that lately has dealt with ASR in the last couple of years. So they had been well educated. And I've gone to Dallas and a couple of other areas and spoke to their chapters on the same thing. So in Texas, the word is being put out, and PHTA is well aware of it. And that is a good source of information to go to. You don't have to be a member to get a lot of this information. You can just, as public, you can go in and access quite a bit of information on this. There's several webcasts. The pages I mentioned are frequently FAQ, frequently asked question pages, and some other types of information there as well.
Yeah, so there's been several articles also in trade journals that if you actually do a Google search, you can find those for homeowners on ASR and swimming pools. So actually you were quoted quite a bit in, I think, both the articles that I read, one here recently and one several years ago. But anyway, that's another source.
There was one even put out in Texas Monthly that dealt with this.
Yeah. So it's something that I think if you're in the Austin area, you definitely want to be aware of and be familiar with. But in other areas, it doesn't hurt to ask your contractor how they can handle and deal with making sure that you don't have an ASR situation.
Absolutely.
Other thoughts or tips that you would have for someone that's looking at this situation?
One of the things, I mean, for anybody considering building a pool can be built well, safely, and for all practicality, ASR free. It just requires a little education, and on your part as the pool owner, and making sure that your contractor is educated. As I mentioned, there's no licensing requirement in Texas, which is a shame, but you need to make sure that your contractor is well aware of what he's dealing with. Another thing I deal with in a lot of my I call them tech talks, they're the shorter versions of a longer seminar, is proper construction. What's the right amount of steel? You will see, and even most engineers will quote ASTM 318 and the amount of 0.2% for shrinkage and temperature reinforcement, crack prevention. That's fine for in a house where you're going to cover it with a wood floor, vinyl, carpet, or something like that. You take me to any 10 houses in town that you selected, you pull up the flooring and I'll find cracks in the floor.
All the time.
That's not good for a pool. For a pool, you really want more in the 0.5%, 0.6% range. Also, what I've seen more often than I would like to admit is contractors who are well-intentioned, and they put a thicker wall there, like a 12-inch thick wall, thinking, well, I'm giving them a thicker, stronger wall. This is a better pool. Well, yes and no. The problem is that as you put more concrete, you need more reinforcing to counteract that shrinkage as it cures. If you don't do that, you're going to get shrinkage cracks. And that steel needs to be within about 3 to 4 inches of the surface that it's trying to protect. Well, if you've got a 12-inch wall with a layer in the center, that closest steel is about 6 inches away from whatever surface it's trying to protect.
Yeah.
Assuming it's in the middle. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you're going to get cracks, and that's going to accelerate ASR.
You need a double mat of steel.
Anything over 10 inches should have, 10 inches and over should have 2 mats of steel.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's always tricky too when you're shooting, that you don't get, voids in that process. And that's where your nozzleman's a key factor in how all that works and everything.
That's right.
So I would say that when you deal with investment of this level, you want to deal with people that are professionals. They know what they're doing and they understand what they're doing and they know the procedures that they have to go through. And the chance of you getting a good deal by dealing with somebody that's new or inexperienced is not a wise investment in most cases, unless they can prove otherwise. Anyway, but that's just my 2 cents worth. So.
And part of what added to the problem then was when COVID came along, rather than people traveling and taking vacations, they went, well, we'll take that vacation money, we'll build a pool, and we'll stay at home and have a staycation.
The demand skyrocketed.
People coming out of the woodwork who all of a sudden had a pickup truck and were a pool builder. Yeah. I mean, how hard can it be to dig a hole in the ground and put some concrete in it? Yeah. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. And that led to a lot of cases. I think just in Austin, they were issuing something on the order of 3,000 pool permits a year. That doesn't include the surrounding towns, Round Rock, Buda, everything that went Liberty Hill, all around Cedar Park, didn't include those. You look at the total number of pools that were built between about 2018 and, 2022 or so. I mean, you could be looking at 20 to 30,000 pools easily that could potentially have the problem of ASR in them. Of course, not all of them are going to, but I mean, that's your statistical pool that you're starting to deal with.
Right. And your qualified subcontractor base didn't increase at all during that time period.
No.
And so there were all kinds of people that were flying by the seat of their pants because I did something like this and now I'm going to go do a swimming pool. So, yeah, we're dealing with those ramifications already today, which is sad to see so many structural failures, which have nothing to do with ASR,
Right.
just very poorly built vessels that are having to be totally redone. But luckily, I design new pools. I don't have to deal with all the remodels, although some cases we blow them up and start over. So that's the easiest thing. One of the things is we have a section in the podcast. It's called True Crime. So is there something you would say for a homeowner today that if they didn't do this, it would be a true crime for that to happen?
Well, the main thing would be educating yourself about pool construction. I mean, this is probably going to be the second largest investment you have right behind your house. Even your car is likely, unless you got a pretty fancy car, is not going to cost as much as the pool. So you need to do a little education on your own and learn about some of this. I mean, when you, excuse me, when you go to buy a house, you call a house inspector to come look at it and go through the house and find out what's wrong. There are some inspectors that can look at pools, but you need to be very, careful of who you get on that. But you're basically doing, unless you're going to go into full testing, you're doing a visual inspection, and there's only so much you can tell on that. That's for an already built pool. If you're getting ready to build one, go to things like PHTA, ask around, get some information and find out what the proper way to build it is. There's people at PHTA in contact. Find builders that are educated. Don't talk to just one, talk to several. You can Google a lot of this stuff too. It's not as readily available in a concise form. I've spent a lot of hours on the internet going through articles and things, but they are there and will tell you about, what it is, why it forms, and how to prevent it. So the biggest thing is not preparing yourself. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you should do some preparation because others are not always looking out for your best interest.
This is true in just about everything. So, but yeah, there's a lot of people that don't know what they're doing. And as you do your investigation, you're going to be the safest with those that do. So, do some research on it and work with educated people. So how did you get involved in the swimming pool industry? I'm just curious as an engineer.
Oh gosh, I've been doing this for 35 years or so, somewhere in that range. Started out and had some people had some pool problems, and and my background is architectural engineering with a structures major, and looking at the pools and finding out why there were cracks in them. They'd have a problem where it had settled. A lot of it around here, we've got a lot of expansive clay, and differential moisture creates movement problems over time. Got more and more into it, and started designing them. As a matter of fact, one of the builders I know was doing some pools and asked me to design several pools for him. So did some research into what needed to be done, and knock on wood, we've not had any callback issues on our pools. I will admit that I tend to be a little more conservative probably than some. When you get to the west side of town where there's clay, I will not design a pool with less than double mat steel, just because you get such an increase in structural strength. And my phrase is, it's the cheapest insurance you can ever buy for that pool. And it goes a long, long ways towards making the pool much more structurally sound and preventing problems. So, that's just part of mine. I do a lot of concrete design anyway, and it was kind of a natural following into that. With architectural engineering, that encompasses engineering of the building industry. So I do electrical, not electronics, but electrical, like distribution for houses, branch circuits and panels and things, plumbing, structure, well, air conditioning, which really doesn't apply to pools, but it was a natural flow into that because several of those categories go right into it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Trey's not here, but Trey has some standard questions that he asks so we get to know people better over time.
Okay.
So I'll ask Trey's questions for him since he's not here. So he wants to know what your favorite book is, your favorite meal is, and gosh, what's the other one?
Movie.
Oh, movie. Thank you, Spider. So, and then I always want to know where your favorite place to go is. So anyway.
Well, you can put me on the spot here. Favorite books. I am a Clive Cussler fan. Sahara is one of the good ones, but any of the Clive Cussler books I love. Let's see, what were the other ones? Favorite food?
Yes, sir.
My wife is going to tell you that it is shrimp enchiladas. Anytime we go to Mexican food, that either that or a chile relleno is the first thing I order. That kind of sets the standard as to whether we're coming back to that restaurant or not.
Okay.
Let's see. What was the next one?
Movies.
Let me come back to that one in a second. Think about it. I'm just drawing a blank right now. But
And then your favorite place to travel.
To travel, I will say Sweden. I was originally born in Sweden, and I have a brother over there. And we were over a couple of summers ago to visit him for a month. Beautiful country. I was adopted. My mother is Swedish, and my father was American. And so we would go back when I was younger. She would visit her father, who still lived there, for several weeks through the summer. Had a little cottage on the side of my adopted uncle's dairy farm. So as a kid, I would get to go work on the dairy farm, help milk the cows, drive the tractors, stuff like that, which I just thought was great. And the country is gorgeous, very clean. The people are very nice. When we went back over there a couple of years ago and spent a month, just had a wonderful time. It is a great place to go visit. Would highly recommend it. Stockholm is a wonderful city to go see. Lots of things to do there. They've got the old Vasa warship, which was the pride of the King's fleet back in 1628. And back then, you didn't have full plans to build a ship. You had boat rights. Well, the problem was that they got a Dutch and a Swedish boat right, and they built their boats slightly differently. So the boat got built a little too narrow and a little too tall on the maiden voyage out into the harbor out in Stockholm there. They opened the lower gun ports to do a cannon salute to the king. A gust of wind came, heeled the ship over, water came in, and it sank less than a mile into its maiden voyage. Now, the advantage of the Baltic over there is that the salinity is such that the wood borers do not live and attack the wood. So they were able to find the ship. Well, they knew where it was. And back in I'm going to say it was the late 60s, mid-late 60s, they were able to raise the ship intact, which is the first time they had done this to any ship this size, because it's an enormous ship. And they pulled it into a slip, which is now the museum, then built the museum around it, drained the slip, had to preserve the wood carefully over several years, moisten it and put preservatives in it. And it's now on display. And when this last time we went and were able to see it, I had seen it before just after, like within a year after they had raised it, and the wood was all very dark black and, not that attractive. Now you can see all the carving on the what do you call the back, the fantail of the boat is just immaculately impressive. And it represents different stories. And of course, this was the king's flagship. And the Swedes back then were pretty much the domineering force of northwestern Europe. And this was a statement to people, you don't mess with the king because this is what we've got. Needless to say, when it went under, before it had reached a mile out, he was not pleased. And I think several boat rights did not fare so well after that.
No, I can imagine. So, wow. Anyway, cool. So, favorite movie?
Movies. Some of the Mission Impossible ones are great. I like those. Let's see. There was one I had on the tip of my tongue. What was it? I'll think of it as soon as we get off of this, but I like the action adventure movies.
It goes with the books you read. So
Mhm.
I understand. Well, I greatly appreciate you being on. So if someone has some questions and wanted to reach out to you, is there a good way to communicate with you?
Yeah, they can email me at john@mmIbuildings.com, and it's JOHN. And I will be happy to answer them. It may take me a day or two, depending on. A lot of times I'm out of the office for several days at a time, but if they're patient, I will get back and answer them.
Awesome. Well, again, we greatly appreciate you for sharing today because it's a topic of high interest to a lot of people, and it helps people understand what it is and what it isn't, and whether they need to have a concern about it. So,
Right.
which is always important for us to help people understand what's best for them to do in their backyard.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, you have an awesome day, sir.